Let us now create our infinite background, or better yet, simulate the effect of our infinite background. And we are going to start the same way as we did with our cloud collector. So I'm going to select the main camera and I'm going to right click it and create empty game object. This is going to be our background or background collectors. Again, I'm going to select our background collectors and create two empty game objects. So create empty, create empty. One is going to be our background collector and another one is going to be background spawner. So spawner. And I'm going to select both of them and I'm going to set their layer at BG because, as I said in the beginning when we have created our backgrounds, we are going to set their layer at BG because we only want them to collide with the game objects that have the layer BG. So we are setting also our cloud collector and spawner on that same layer. We also need to add a box collider to both of these, and I'm going to resize the x-axis at, let's say, 9. And y-axis can be 0.1 again, and both of them are going to be triggers. And I'm going to set our cloud or background collector at position 19. So here above this first background, and our background spawner is going to be at position -6. Or better yet, let me just put it a little bit here. So we can set it at the moment at -6, and we can see later on if we have a problem, then we can simply reposition it. And I'm also going to tag them with this red tag, so on our background spawner and background collector. What we are also going to do in our background scripts folder, I've created the folder called collectors, and here I have BG collector and BG spawner. So attach the appropriate, so the BG collector is going to be attached on background collector and BG spawner is going to be attached, so I have clicked it without purpose, and BG spawner is going to be attached on our BG spawner. And we are first going to deal with our BG collector. So here, let me just scroll down for our BG spawner or scroll up. And as I said, we are going to first deal with our BG collector. And here, the same way as with our cloud collector, we are only going to have void on trigger enter 2D, which takes a collider 2D, and I'm going to name it target. And here we are simply going to say if our target.tag is equal to background. And we need to go back and create this background tag. So I'm going to select one of the game objects here in the scene, select here for the tag, and I'm going to add a new tag which I'm going to name background, and I'm going to select all 4 or all 5 of our game backgrounds, and I'm going to tag them with the background tag. So make sure that you do this, because otherwise this will not work. Because here we are testing if we are colliding with the background, then we are going to simply say target.gameObject set active to be equal to false, simply deactivating our game object. And here I have updated my system, so I'm simply going to close it now because that's not of your interest. And anyway, let's go on or move forward. Now that we have finished with our BG collector, so here the BG collector, essentially what he's going to do, he's simply going to collect our backgrounds, deactivate them as well on the way when we move our camera. Our BG spawner is going to respawn our background, so this is for what we are going to use our BG spawner. Here we are going to have two variables. One is going to be a private game object array, which is going to be our backgrounds, and another one is also going to be a private float, which is going to be last Y position, so last Y. And now what we need to do, here I'm going to create a void, get backgrounds and set last Y function. And here we are going to get the backgrounds and set our last Y position because we are going to do the same thing as we did with our clouds. we are going to use the same technique in order to reposition our backgrounds. So here I'm going to say our backgrounds is equal to GameObject.find GameObjects with tag. Again, using plural, not singular, so don't use GameObject. Here it needs to be S, not GameObject, but instead GameObjects with tag background. And this is going to get me all of the backgrounds that we have, all game objects in the scene that have a tag background. And for the last Y position, I'm going to say last Y is equal to our backgrounds and the element that's at 0 index dot transform dot position dot Y. And now we are going to write a for loop for int I is equal to 1 as long as I is less than backgrounds dot length increment I. So you might wonder why I'm using I equal to 1, because usually we use I equal to 0. Well, here we have already taken the element that's at 0 index. We have taken his Y position and set it here to be the last Y position. Now we need to compare this last Y position with all other Y positions, or with the Y position of all other game objects here in our backgrounds, in order to actually see if we have, well, the last Y position. So here I'm going to say if our backgrounds and the element that's at index I, or simply here I'm going to say if our last Y is less than our backgrounds, so backgrounds, and the element that's at I dot transform dot position dot Y. If our last Y is less than this position, then what we need to do, we need to reassign last Y to be equal to, well, that position. So we need to use our backgrounds and transform that position dot Y, and that way we are going to get the last Y position of our backgrounds. Excuse me, here we actually need to test if our last Y is greater than our background's transform position Y, because we are going downwards, and if we go downwards, so if we select the last background, his position Y is at minus or negative 24. The position of this background is at 8. So we are going downwards, and that's why we need to test if our last Y is greater than this Y position, meaning that we need to reassign this position to our last Y. And we are going to call this function here in the start function. And why we are doing it like this, you might wonder. Well, when we use this GameObjects find GameObject, find GameObjects with tag, this is not going to sort our GameObjects by any order. So it's not going to sort them by their name or their position, so on and so forth. That's why we need to check here where is the last Y position in order to calculate that Y position. Now here we need to say void onTrigger enter. So onTrigger enter 2D, which takes a collider 2D, and I'm going to name it target. And we are going to do the same thing as we did with our clouds. So we need to say if our target.tag is equal to the background. So if we are colliding with the background, what we need to do next, we need to check if our target.transform.position Y is equal to last Y, meaning the same way as with our backgrounds, or excuse me, with our clouds, we have the background that's at the last Y position. So now what we need to do is we need to say here vector3 temp is equal to transform, or excuse me, it's equal to target.transform.position in order to store that variable. We also need to take the height from our game object, and we are going to do it like this. So here I'm going to cast a box collider, so it will not be collider 2D, but instead it will be box collider target, and here I'm going to say size Y. And why am I doing it like this? Well, in simple terms, let me copy this background here. So I'm going to copy it and position it here. Actually, I'm going to copy it 2 times and position the second one here. Let's imagine that we touch with our background collector, we touch this background here, which is the last background. Now we need to reposition this background down here below it in order to combine these two and simulate an infinite background. So how can we know where we actually need to position this background so that it fits perfectly here with this background? For that, we need to take the height of our sprite. But we have already attached a box collider on our sprite, and we can simply use the Y position, or the size Y, which we see that it's 8, and we can use that position or that size, which is this size. So from here where I'm pointing with my mouse up to here where I'm also pointing with my mouse. So we can use that size, and we can simply reposition our game object by using that size, and then we can, well, simply reposition it. In order to demonstrate this, let's say I position this game object at -46. And this game object needs to be positioned 8 points, well, negative below it. So -46 and -8 is -54. If I take this one and position it at -54, we see that it exactly fits below our background. So this is what we are going to do essentially in our code. So let us go back in our code, and now what we need to do, we need to write a for loop. So here I'm going to say for int I is equal to 0, as long as I is less than our background's dot length, we are going to increment I, and we are going to test for each background that's not active. So if our backgrounds and the element that's at I dot active here in hierarchy. So if it's not active in the hierarchy, what we need to do is we need to say temp dot y minus equals the height, and then what we need to do is we need to reassign the last y to the new, well, last y. So we need to say last y is equal to temp dot y, because this is now the last y position. And now we simply need to reassign the position back to our background. So we need to say backgrounds, and the element that's at index I, transform that position, is equal to temp. So it's equal to this position right here. And lastly, we need to say backgrounds, the element that's at index I, set active to be true, because we want to activate it again with this new position. And we are setting it to be active because here our BG collector is going to set it to be not active. That's why we are checking here. If it's not active, then set it to be active, but with the new position. Now we can actually test this out. And if we go back here before we run the game, if we run the game now, we are not going to see any difference. So I'm running the game, I have the background collector, we see that he is not collecting the backgrounds and the spawner is not spawning them, because we need to attach a rigid body to both of them. So rigid body, and set is kinematic to be true, the same way as we did with our cloud collectors, because otherwise this will not work. And I'm simply going to move down the script. So select this script also and move it down. Now that we have added rigid body to both our collector and spawner, and set is kinematic to true, we can rerun the game. And now we are going to see the collector collecting the backgrounds when he touches them. So he have collected one. He is going to collect the second one, but before that we see that our background spawner actually spawned it. And we see that we have, or we are simulating our infinite background. So what we can do is we can select our background collector and maybe reposition him at, I don't know, 16 or 18. So reposition him at 18 or even 17. And let's rerun the game now, because I want him to collect at least 2 game objects or at least 2 backgrounds before we respawn, and we are respawning 2 new backgrounds. Of course, you can reposition that number every time just in order to test it. So now we can simply play our game and we see that everything works, except that our player has died, he has fallen down, and he is gone now. So let me select the player again, and now we see that we actually have this infinite background effect. So now we can play our game, and we see that we don't run out of clouds or out of backgrounds, and our game finally is shaping to something. Next, what we are going to do is we are going to tweak our player in the next video, because our player can go off screen. So if I go now to the left, player is gone, and we are going to create bounds that are not going to allow our player to go, if I take him now, to go outside of the bounds on this side or on this side. And we are also going to see to create points, score, so on and so forth. So we are stopping here, and in the next video we are going to tweak our player a little more.